गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गाना शॉट। गाना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। Today we are going to talk of defense and space. Uh, and to talk about defense and space in India, I have with me General A.K. Bhat. And first, at the outset, let me welcome General Bhat. General Bhat, good evening and welcome once again to Ghana Shot.
Thank you. So
Right?
it's an honor to be there with you.
Yeah.
And professionally, I've known you for such a long time and have a very high regard for you. I
Thanks a
remember,
lot.
I
Please.
remember when I was a young colonel and you were doing your NDC, how you would share your thoughts and visions of a future and better India. And you
Yeah.
still continue to do it through this platform.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that compliment. But I would like to first set the stage and tell everyone why we're doing this whole program on defense and space. Last week we went through the session. We actually started the session, but due to technical issues and transmission problems, we couldn't go through. So I suspended that session halfway through. Then I requested General Butt to come back again, and I'm very grateful to him that he's back. But for those of you who are watching this session for the first time, I must tell you, as his nameplate suggests, General Butt is the DG of ISPA. What is ISPA? Indian Space Providers Association. So he's looking after the private sector for entry into space. Now he is commanded 15 Corps in the Valley, and he's also been the DGMO of the Indian Army. So he knows the operational environment well, he knows the ground situation well, and now he is into exclusive field. It's a new field into which India and its private sector are entering. But let me put this connect between space and defense where we are in India. Uh, you know, India has, it started with a modest beginning in space, but we are now a space power. Uh, if I say space power, what are the four markers of the space power? The first marker is that uh, way back in 2014, we sent a spacecraft to the Mars, and we made sure orbiter of ours entered the Mars orbit, and it functioned by orbiting around Mars for 8 years till 22. Now there was a series of Chandrayaan launches, one, two, three. One was just a launch with the orbiter. Second was we attempted to land on the moon, which we couldn't. But last year we did it, Chandrayaan 3. Right? We put a lunar orbiter and a lander, Vikram, and it landed. Right? And it's now dormant at that point of there. And then towards the end of last year, September, we sent something called Aditya. This was a mission to the solar orbit, L1 orbit. And there it went and stayed for quite some time and to study the solar system and what the solar energy we get. And now, next year, we are going to send a manned mission to space. Now, these are four important landmarks in this whole space journey. And there are only four countries who can today in the world who can do all these four. That is Russia, India, USA, and China. In any country which can do these is a superpower. So for those of you who think superpower in terms of economy and military might and all that, we're already there. Okay, once you're a superpower, it's a matter of relativity. Okay. Now, what does space give you? That's the next thing which you have to understand. Space gives you the ability of new technologies. Space is the toughest environment where everything has to survive. There's no air. Whatever you send has to survive. And you put a thing in space, you can't repair it. If your car goes bad, you can take it to a mechanic and repair it. You can't do that in space. And space, you put a satellite up today, it lasts for 8 to 10 years. So whatever you do today, you have to do it for the next 10 years. So you have to have vision when you send it into space. It also gives the ability to miniaturize. It also gives you the ability to handle new technologies. It also gives you the ability to handle new materials. Because, right now, that space has an equivalent to high altitude because on Earth or super high altitudes in which our men work, especially in eastern Ladakh, Siachen, and all those places, are amongst the toughest spaces where people work and where existence is a problem on Earth. So there is a lot of technology you transfer from space into the a battlefield. And if you see in the military sphere today, everything you do is through space. Whether you it's a you you know navigation, surveillance, you say control of missile systems, communication, right? Everything is through space. Space is ubiquitous. It is for this reason I requested General Bhatt to come and talk to us about this whole thing. I've given a little lengthy introduction to put everyone in the larger picture. I would like him to fill the gaps in what I've said and the granularity with which he is quite aware of and he deals with it on a daily basis. General Bhatt, over to you, please.
Thank you, sir. And with your permission, I'll start with a brief background into
Yeah, yeah.
how space has become. Very interestingly, though human beings have had a fascination for space for ages, astrology, astronomy has been part of human endeavors for a long time. But physically sending anything on space has happened much later. And actually, this was a fallout of the World War or when the World War was ending, where the first ballistic missile, that is the V 2 rocket, was made by the Germans. And this is very interesting because V 2 stands for Vengeance 2. And the vengeance was supposed to be on the Allies. This targeted the capital of the Allies and primarily UK in the end of the war. Had this come a little earlier, maybe the impact on the war would have been different. But what impact it had was all these scientists who were working on the V 2 rocket were picked up by the Americans under Operation Paperclip. 110 of the scientists under one scientist called Von Braun were taken to America, and they are the ones who took America all along in the space journey up till landing on the moon. Well, Soviet Union was not waiting to be left behind. They picked up 500 scientists under Grotto. And here is where the space race started. The initial space race was more for status, more for who would reach space. The first satellite, as you know, was put by Soviet Union. The first human being in space was put by Soviet Union. The first walk in space was by Soviet Union. But then America felt threatened. And the president of Canada gave an ultimatum that by 1970 we should land on the moon. And sure enough, the American scientists, led by the German scientists I'm talking of, by 1969, June had landed a man on the moon. Thereafter, the competition for space slightly slowed down. Though communication satellites started being made, there were successes and failures of that. And that is the time while this was happening that India had just entered into the space race or into the space journey, as I would say it. It is in 1964 that we had our first rocket, and it was a sounding rocket. And this sounding rocket was not even ours. It was we had borrowed it from USA. It had very interestingly been brought in a Russian helicopter to the site where it was launched from, that is Thumba, which is at the magnetic equator. And the sounding rocket explosives were given to us by France. It was a great collaboration between many nations. But what I wanted to highlight to you is India was at a stage of sounding rocket, while America in a few years and Soviet Union had reached the moon. But from then till today, just last year, we landed on the moon, Chandrayaan 3. And Chandrayaan 3's soft landing on the South Pole makes us the first country to be able to do it. A great success in between has been Mangalyaan, Aditya 1, Chandrayaan 1, and many more successes by ISRO. ISRO has really put us on the high table of space as far as technology goes. Brand India in space is very high. Now, this is the reason. Uh, a very interesting thing thereafter in the world, what has happened is in around 2000, private players started coming into space. And this is called the New Space Revolution, led by Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and the owner of Virgin Galactic. These three multimillionaires or billionaires put in their money, and they had three different aims. And most interestingly, the aim of the two leading private players in space are slightly different. Elon Musk aspires to take human beings to the Mars and occupy Mars, while Jeff Bezos believes that first we should go to the moon and thereafter go to the other planets. But both want to go beyond the Earth and occupy other planets. This has given a great push to technology. And NASA, under President Obama, had reviewed that the funds they were spending were not adequate and private space should come into it. And that is the time these billionaires have come into it. And today, just 3 days back, you would have seen the Starship, the rocket, the Falcon rocket, which was sent up, has come down, precisely landed, and been caught at the landing station by two hands. It is a technological wonder, a wonder where reusable rockets now are becoming more and more usable. And the impact of that is that the cost of going to space, the cost of going to Moon and Mars is going to significantly reduce. Already, Elon Musk has reduced it by 10 times from what it was before by using a first stage reusable rocket. But ultimately, he wants to make the whole rocket reusable, and the way he's going about it, I'm sure it will happen. Now, what has lately happened? Two more things in the world and in India also. Firstly, is commercialization of space. And what is this commercialization of space? Space, which was used for monitoring ballistic missiles, maybe for GPS, that is global positioning systems, now is used much more by the civilians. If you wake up in the morning today, anyone in India, if he checks the weather, he's using space. If he takes out money from an ATM, space is being used. If you move from point A to point B, and if you're using Google, you're using space. If the farmer is trying to find out when should he plant his seeds, he's using space. And so many usages. Now, these very large usages of space have resulted in from 5 to 6 spacefaring nations, and we are one of them. Today, there are 92 countries which have assets in space. They do not have the capability to launch, but definitely they have outsourced or even manufactured satellites on their own. These satellites have been launched by countries which have the capability to launch satellites and even private companies now. And today, 92 countries have assets on in space and they're using it in some form for strategic use, that is for the military, as well as for private use. Now, in India, there was a historical decision taken by the Prime Minister in June 2020 when he decided to open space to private players. And this was a little of this trigger was because of private players who were operating in America. But more importantly, the government thought there was an opportunity to get more innovation, get more money, and have our scientific capability outside the government to be used to further our strategic military aims and also for commercial use. And in this, what events have happened? Okay, one thing which happened, and here the Indian armed forces were ahead of even before privatization of space took place, was that the Defense Space Agency in India was created in 2019. And what does it imply? It implies is that now, with Air Force as the lead agency, all requirements from space, which is recognized as the fourth domain of warfare, everything will be aggregated, planned, and the vision set for it by the Defense Space Agency, which is led by an Air Vice Marshal of the Air Force and has people from all the three services. In the very short time they have been there, they've done a human job. Every Many people do ask, if we really think of space as a very important domain, why don't we have a space command? Well, definitely. In the future, India has to have a space command. But today, with the kind of number of assets we have, space command would be a little early. We have to have much more assets in forms of satellites and other things before we have a command. But the basic structure for it has already been set in. Now, what has happened is, after the announcement of the Prime Minister in June 2020, and the space policy coming up in 2023. Now, I should tell you about the space policy. What does the space policy do? Space, where all activities could only be carried out by ISRO or the government. Today, the government has allowed private players, and they call them the non government entities, that is big public sector entities, private sector entities, startups, to do anything in space. They're allowed to do anything in satellite communication, in PNT, in ISR or remote sensing, and even debris detection and whatever. In fact, the last line of that policy says private players in space are even allowed to do asteroid mining and make colonies in space in the future. Now, with that laid down, it has provided a great opportunity to private players in India. And when this was happening, uh, my organization was also raised primarily to create an ecosystem of private players in space and be a bridge between these private players and the government to ensure that this ecosystem gets created in good time. One of the successes we have had in this very short time, and I thank the Ministry of Defense for it, is we were the three services, along with DSA, along with ISRO, along with DRDO, sat down together and identified what are the aspirations, or what does the armed forces require from space. This was defined in terms of 75 defense challenges. And these challenges are in all domains in where the military uses space. They are in space communication, they are in ISR, they are in, that is, intelligence, surveillance, and recce. That is the kind of satellites we would require for that in future. It is in PNT, that is, we already have, as you know, 7 Navik satellites in space, which give us a footprint 1500 kilometers by 1500 kilometers all over India, where Indian GPS system can be used for all systems. We have started using it in civilian usages, and very slowly now that is also being used by the military. The military has already ordered about 26,000 of these uh, uh, receivers for being put in various weapon systems, for putting it to make GPSs out of it, Indian Navik GPSs, and in the future it will also be for guidance of weapon systems, ballistic missiles, and even air launched weapon systems. Now, while this is happening in MDA also, as you know today, the entire marine domain awareness, identification of the dark hulls, the gray hulls, and the white hulls. Basically, normal ships which are moving in the sea, and dark hulls, which the ones which do not emanate any AR signal, and the grey hulls which are on a compromise. All identifications by the Indian Navy is done. Their communication is through GSAT satellite, uh, because for them to communicate with all the ships, all the radars, and everything, which is in a very wide expanse, cannot be done by terrestrial communication. It is done by a GSAT satellite called Rukmini. Apart from that, the AI system, which is internationally used, that is automatic identification system of ships, is based on satellites. And in future, we look at satellites which will be able to look for our navy in our area of interest, that is the entire Indian Ocean, to be able to identify ships which are civilian ships or they are grey or dark hulls. Already work on this is going on. Now, to again go back, where does the military use it? Like General Shankar has said, most importantly for ISR, for satellite communication, for PNT, and a new domain which is now coming, and of course, guidance of weapon systems. Presently, it is not being done in India, but later our weapons have to be guided by our own navigation system. But things in the future are launch on demand. And here I would just take a little time. Launch on demand or responsive launch is a new term being used, a new idea which has come. And what it means is when the war starts, and with whatever assets you have in space to see your area of interest or see the border, say the Chinese border or the Pakistani border or the sea, you have already got assets in it, but they are not seeing it 24 by 7. Presently, they see it maybe in a 10 to 12 days time when they repeat the same spot once again. The desirable is that at least it should be 2 days, two times in a day, that is in 12 hours. This will take a little time. But in hot war, maybe you want to see a spot or a few spots, maybe in Ladakh, where there's something builds up, or in Doklam, where you want a nearly 2 to 3 hours look at a place, or you want enhanced communication at a place. And that is the time you use a rocket, a launch vehicle, immediately. You want a launcher, and this is where launch on demand comes. So, what it means is on requirement at a hotspot, you launch a rocket and you launch a satellite which would be going in an orbit where it would be covering that place. Now, here I should tell you is one satellite in the low Earth orbit is inadequate to cover an area for you. For it can only cover for 1/8 of a day, because to cover one point you require 8 satellites in one orbit moving to that point. So that said, if we want to have a hotspot covered, we will require firstly 7 to 8 satellites ready and launchers ready for that. This is what is being envisaged and planned in the future. But there's a cost involved, because you have to pay the private player, or ISRO has to keep them ready. That is the launchers as well as the satellites to be launched at the hotspot in time of need. But yes, these satellites would be much, much smaller, because what is one thing what has happened in the satellite domain is miniaturization has taken place. Satellites which were as big as a jumbo jet have now been replaced by satellites which are as big as a laptop. In fact, one of the best companies which is giving ISR of the whole world, uh, planet, has a dove which is a satellite of just this size. And this is what will happen in the future. Now, in India today, what has happened in the last 3 to 4 years is private players have re- responded to the 75 challenges which were put in by the Ministry of Defense. About 30 challenges have already been given to private players to develop. They're in terms of sensors, in terms of something required for satellite communication, miniature satellites, and like I said, launch of demand is one of the challenges which will be there. But what today the private players have achieved in India is two of the companies have been able to launch rockets. The first one to do it was Skyroot, and the second one of them is Agnicool, and Agnicool happens to be incubated at IIT Madras, and even General Shankar, I know, has been advising the founding members of that. This company is unique, and we see a lot of opportunities coming from this company because Agnicool has is the first company in the world which has made a 3D printed engine. And what does it imply? Also, they're the first who are using semi cryogenic fuel. What does a 3D printed engine imply? That you can make rocket launchers very fast and at a cheaper cost. And as Agnicool goes for an orbital launch now, very soon, and they prove the technology in the orbital domain, they would be one of the major competitors for providing this not only in India but to the whole world. Even in satellite manufacturing, we have 3 to 4 companies which have already launched satellites. And out of this, I would like to talk to you about one company, a company of very young men, made in 2018, which plans to launch 36 satellites to cover the whole world. This is in the low Earth orbit, and they are in the hyperspectral domain. In ISR, the more details you can have, if you can see through bad weather, if you can see through foliage, and if you can make out from even after a tank track has gone through it in more detail, there are technologies which are beyond the electro optical. There is SAR technology, and more advanced to SAR, the best end of the technology is hyperspectral technology. And this company in India has been able to master hyperspectral technology. Their satellites will have hyperspectral technology, and they have proven their first satellite, which has the outputs of which have come. And the most interesting thing is they've already got an order from NRO, that is the National Recce Office of USA. And of course, because it is an Indian company, once they have the product ready, it will be available to be used by India. So, in satellite manufacturing, in rocket manufacturing, and in applications, a number of companies have come in. And in application, the usage is there both for the military and for private use. One company, SatShop, this is the company in Bangalore again. They are using open source data and data from many other places and giving solutions to banks. To make the bank can today make out if a crop was really planted, was if a farmer at many times insure for an expensive crop and grow a crop which is cheaper and then claim for the insurance cost. This can now be made by satellites. Uh, was it plantains which were planted, or was it millet which was planted? And this company from applications now, is planning to make satellites to give a complete solution. In the future, we see two very distinct things coming up. And one of the things when General Shankar was saying that today, if a satellite has to be repaired, it can't be. It becomes useless when it has gone to space. Well, what happens today is a normal satellite would have a life of 7 to 8 years. And when the fuel within the satellite gets over, it has to be pushed up into the graveyard orbit, which is ahead of the geosynchronous orbit, that it floats around there and that is forever, creating space garbage or space debris there. Or it has to come down to Earth where it burns and gets destroyed. But now the technology, and today itself, there's a company which has announced, SpaceX, that it is going to have on orbit maintenance. They are getting into a technology when one satellite will go and meet the other satellite, refuel it, or repair a component which has gone bad and then come back. Meaning, a satellite which you have there will be there for a lifetime. There's another company which has come into a very interesting thing. They've just announced their capability and it has brought interest from the entire world. And this company is a company of young men in Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. What they have announced is, satellites, the lowest where satellites are manufactured in the world are at 500 kilometers and above. Because below that, the friction, the gravity impact is so much that a satellite cannot survive for a long time. But this company has worked out a model, they are testing it to have satellites at 200 kilometers, and they're very confident that they will succeed in it. They're putting special layers to safeguard it against friction and other heat issues and all. And if they are successful in this, if you have a satellite at 200 kilometers, it is something like a aircraft having a constant surveillance, because sensors would be able to deliver much more accurate ISR or communication for whatever platform you use these satellites. And the first people who are looking at this technology are here in India. I'll stop here, sir, and be ready to
Yeah,
take any questions.
yeah. I think you outlined something very significant issues of what is happening in the space sector. So instead of asking questions, let me elucidate a few issues which you have said so that people understand. You know, when General Butt said today, a satellite or yeah, a satellite can come to this size, like a computer. You're looking at a bread box size, almost. That's the normal size people talk of, bread box. And what happens with that is very interesting, right? You have the ability to launch so many, like in a constellation, that if one satellite goes over, the second takes over, then the third takes over, and the fourth takes over. And you have to understand, as the satellite goes in the orbit from North Pole to South Pole around, right? The Earth is also spinning in, east to west. So it's a three-dimensional motion. So the satellite actually virtually stays over a place for a very little time, and the second satellite has to come, and the third has to come, and the fourth has to come. So a small satellite gives you the capability of being persistent, and then you go, if you put a lot of satellites, you have the capability of constant stare. Constant stare is a tremendous capability for people to have, and when you integrate this constant stare with AI and things like that, a lot of things get put in place. I'll give you an example. You know, to last year, or it was the year before, last year, I think, uh, or 2 years back, that balloon of,
Yeah,
China
the
flew
Chinese
over
one.
USA. The Chinese balloon flew over USA. One of these small satellites in USA caught this balloon. It's not that as if USA didn't know what was happening. They caught this balloon and they tracked this balloon. They extracted all the information out of this balloon, and through AI and EW, within a matter of about less than 24 hours, they knew that this balloon had started from Hainan. That is the capability of, and that's the potential of space, right? And when General Butt says there's a thing which is going to go at 200 kilometers, it opens up a lot of possibilities. Then he spoke of something. Look, satellites can be kept in space forever. You can be repaired in space and all that. What is that? That gives you something called co-orbital capability. That you have a satellite going, so a satellite can go co-orbit along with that and repair it. Now, if you can repair it, you can even destroy that satellite. So it's not, so countries which can do this co-orbital, launches, or rather control of co-orbit satellites also acquire offensive capability. It's a tremendous offensive capability. You also acquire the capability of taking any satellite and putting it in the graveyard orbit. And this has already been demonstrated by China with one of their own thing. So a lot of things are happening in space, right? This is as far as satellites are concerned. But why are you going to moon? You're going to moon that to the south side, like General Bhatt said, for water. Water is the oil of space. You split water, hydrogen and oxygen, you get fuel. And it is with that fuel you can go anywhere, right? Further. And if you jodo that fuel back, you get energy. Fuel cells are all about hydrogen and oxygen, hydrolysis and reforming. So you get energy through water in space. And you go to Mars because you get deuterium. And deuterium will enable you to do fission. And not fission, sorry, it will enable you to do fusion. And fusion experiments have been carried out in a place called Livermore already, successfully twice in the past 2 years. Okay, and we have gone to the moon. This Aditya is to get data about the sun and fusion reactions. So you are looking at energy capability, energy security for years to come. So the thing about space is just not defense; it is national security. It is national guarantee of sovereignty and everything. So today you are not talking of it, but tomorrow you might be talking of space sovereignty also. But then that's to be seen. Okay. Now there are a lot of questions, Anil. I will not this thing. So we'll take the questions. I think a lot of issues will come out of that. And if in the end, because I see interesting questions here, because this is the first time there where all these viewers of mine have had a chance to listen to someone who's closely associated with India's space program overall. Okay, so I'll take a lot of questions. There are no visible military space assets. How much time would it take for a cold start integration of civilian space assets for military application? Has this cold start been tested?
Now, your question is very true and very correct that there are no visible military space assets. But let me assure you, there are military assets. One, and the second is, everything in space is dual use, be it ISR, be it satellite communication, be it position navigation and timing. All usages of space can be used by civilians and by the military. So, in fact, there is no requirement for cold start. Today, whatever is available from the assets in India, that is, whatever assets have been placed into space by ISRO, be it for civilian use or be it for military use, are all available to be used by the Indian military. Yeah, what I would say is today all of them are not adequate. We do use strategic resources of our allies also, our friendly nations also. But as you would have known, just a week or 2 weeks back, the Cabinet Committee has approved 75 satellites under a program called SBS. And SBS 3, these 70 satellites out of this, about 40 are being 31, 40 will be manufactured by private sector and about 30 will be manufactured by ISRO. And all these satellites will be available for what you say as military assets. This is primarily for ISR. For NAVIC, which is there for PNT, is used by both. Military grade navigation is used by the military, while commercial grade navigation is used by others. This is going on. So it is not that you will have to do it as a cold start. The third is satellite communication. We use assets today in the geosynchronous orbit. And I just wanted to tell you about geosynchronous orbit, what it is. It is a 35,549 kilometers, 21,000 miles. And what is the advantage of that position is that a satellite at that location looks constant from Earth because the orbit of the satellite and the rotation of the Earth is in such a manner that one point on Earth is throughout. There's a persistent look at that point. And you just require three satellites to cover the whole world. So we have satellites there which are providing military grade communication to the Navy, to the Air Force, to the Army, and we've been calling them wrongly, of course, as naval satellites and Air Force satellites and Army satellites. Why I'm saying wrongly? Because they are used by all three services. They are tri-service satellites. Of course, the third satellite, the larger demand will be from the Army, and that is why it is being called the Army satellite, while Rukmini was called a naval satellite. So, in all these three domains, we have assets which are there, Indian assets, and at times we also use assets from other nations. But after we have the 75 satellites, we may not require to use assets from anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so recently Ambani and Mittal both asked government to auction satellite spectrum, but Musk wanted it to be allocated, and government has confirmed it will be allocated. Can you explain this and defense implications?
Oh, yeah. And now, this is a very interesting thing, and I've been handling it for 2 years. And as General Shankar knows, I'm a Gurkha, but I can now handle spectrum. So I'll explain it to you. Spectrum is like they say the new oil to for all communication, and communication today runs the economy. There's a competition between various players to use spectrum. Previously, spectrum was given by administrative means for I'm talking about for terrestrial communication, and it was by first come first serve basis, and that led to the 2G scandal, where there was allegation of some being helped out and given spectrum earlier than other and cheaper and whatever. Then the Supreme Court passed an order that this national asset, this natural national asset, should only be sold by auction for terrestrial communication. Now, there's a difference when it happens for space. In space, the spectrum is not allocated to one person. Multiple users use the same spectrum. In fact, there is sharing of spectrum, and this is the international practice. So, in India, there was an argument should spectrum be auctioned, which the Ambanis believed in because their primary interest was in the terrestrial communication, while all other satellite players, including Mittal, believed that satellites should be allocated by administrative means. The government, after hearing all arguments, resolved this last year when they said we will, when the space the telecom bill was announced, Telecom Bill 2023, it is an act now. It lays down that spectrum for terrestrial communication will be auctioned, spectrum for space will be allocated by administrative means. And that is where it stands today.
Very clear. Okay. Can you kindly explain in layman terms this issue between Tri, Geospectrum, and Starlink in terms of contract approval by GOI? Is the main over data storage or 100% control over access control?
Okay. Well, this actually is not in my domain, but it is basically the issue is of where would the data centers be, and if the data centers are in India, who will control it? Today, previously, assets were oil, land, human resource, but today the biggest asset for any nation to
Data.
be is data, and that is why this data bill is under discussion, and there are different views for it. Uh, uh, and what some of the Indian companies and many, maybe the government is also thinking is we have to ensure that the controls stay within the country.
Yeah. Okay. Allowing foreign participants in the big data vertical and space would be a direct threat to Bharat at the individual citizen level. Has the government considered this related to data security?
Yeah. I would just say a line on this. Even in space and even in the data domain, though we have to have the controls in India, we cannot stop foreign companies from coming into it, because we need to have the best technology, the best AI tools, the best ML tools, and they would not only be within the country but would be also available internationally. But yes, we, like I said before, data is very critical for us. It is a very important asset, and we need to safeguard it.
Yeah, I'd like to just add, the government has to move towards creating cloud centers because you can get data from wherever you want, but you have to store it somewhere. Till now, India doesn't have cloud centers like Amazon or all these
Yeah, big company.
AWS and things like
Yeah,
that. Yeah, big companies. We have small clouds for specific purposes, but big data we need to have. But that's a whole story different, which I'll
yeah,
uh, maybe talk of it some other day. Okay. Civilian space assets feed into the World Wide Web and digital environment. Have these assets across these vectors been integrated for joint operation to disrupt enemy's functions? I don't know whether he can answer that also very clearly here, but give him a roundabout answer.
you what I can make out from your question is usage of civilian space assets also for cyber warfare. Now, as far as I believe, cyber warfare is an ongoing war as part of the grey war which is happening. This is not declared. This undeclared fight between the sovereigns and the powerful sovereigns continues. But today, there's a very large capability which our adversary has, which results in a very strong vulnerability for us. We also have our many military and non-military cyber agencies which are looking into it. Firstly, for having a cyber posture which protects our military and critical civilian assets, as also when need be able to reply to an adversary if it is so. I would leave it at that and not go
Yeah,
into
yeah.
this.
I think that's fine. I would say just give a broad-based answer. Okay. No, this is the one. Yeah. Yeah. Do you think India will be able to successfully produce 5G or even 6G fighter jets to counter China? China has. Look, we'll not talk of this because this is
Let me
not.
assure you,
Uh,
we will.
we
The
will.
single
We will.
word answer is we will.
Okay. Uh, yeah. How capable is Indian intelligence assets? Israel successfully carried out pager attacks, and USA successfully bombed their own twin towers. While we hear nothing about our Indian intelligence. Well, again,
Uh,
this is not related to what we are talking, but you give them you take a
uh,
shot at it.
my answer to you is the best asset is which you don't know till the time it hits someone.
It's yeah, okay,
And I think our India, I would uh, Israel is a leading cyber power, and so is USA. But we have good capabilities. That is where I will leave it.
okay. Why is Indian space defense under Air Force and not a military arm of its own?
I think your information is wrong. Space domain is a separate domain, but in India, what we have done for cyber, for space, and for special operations, we have made a lead service. Presently, Air Force is the lead service for space, Navy is the lead service for cyber, and for special forces, it is Army. But the fact that Defense Space Agency is part of the India IDS and the CDS is because it is not under one single service, because it will serve all the three services and battle in this domain would help all the three services and it will be integrated with all three.
Yeah. On that, we should have no doubt whatsoever. Tomorrow's battle has to be integrated. Any point you pick up on Earth, it will be of interest to Army, Navy, and Air Force the way battles are being fought. And we probably have to go beyond that also. And so, to that extent, it's only a matter of sequencing that Navy has its own first satellite, AWO, all that. The rest, everything is
Yeah.
really everyone's. Yeah, how do you make the transition from an infantryman from Gorkha Rifles and GOC 15 go to someone who's head of Middle Space Agency? Quite a career tangent. Were you always interested in space?
Well, I was as interested as any military officer would be. But let me tell you firstly, the military is the biggest user of space. ISR is most critical to us. And during being while I was the DGMO and while handling the Doklam crisis, I realized how important was space. But that apart, this Gorkha and GOC 15 core has gone into space because the job I do is I create and I integrate opportunities in private space. I'm trying to create a private ecosystem in India. And of course, one of the biggest users of it will be the military. And that I do understand as to what are the usages the military will have for this domain. And most importantly, is maybe they wanted a fresh mind to excite this new domain.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, what steps should we take to nurture space talent in India?
You're very right. There are multiple things which need to be done to nurture space talent. And this is one of the things my association feels is a very important task for us capacity development for the future. Today, what we see, the number of space scientists which would be required in future to meet the demands of our industry, to meet the demand of all our private sector and ISRO, there's a large gap. So what we are doing is we are starting by creating a lot of interest in schools, running competitions in schools, exposing them to what ISRO has achieved so far, and also very recently we have been able to convince the AICTE, that is the organization responsible for technical education in India, to create a new syllabus for engineering colleges, a short syllabus in space. But let me tell you, space talent means talent of mechanical engineering, talent of electrical engineering, talent of communications, talent of computer engineering, and also scientists who know propellants. So it is not one engineering domain or one scientific domain where space for space. There are multiple domains, and the government is definitely looking at getting all these space related subjects being taught in professional colleges and normal colleges for creating this huge manpower which would be required in this sector in the future.
See, I keep dealing with people who teach these subjects, and they can be dabbling in it in a big way. What I want everyone to understand is that, when you talk of any flight in atmosphere, you call it aerodynamics. When you go outside the atmosphere into space, any flight is based on astrodynamics. The principle of aerodynamics and astrodynamics are completely different.
Totally different.
Completely different. Here you use air density, friction, and all that to move. In space, there's no friction. For example, just to give you an idea, we talk of a nuclear blast. The effect of a nuclear blast in atmosphere is different from a nuclear blast in space, because in space there's no medium, so there's no blast at all. So huge differences are there, and this talent to nurture will take time. It's not going to happen in a hurry. But the good thing, what I see, is the government is increasing this window of talent so that more people are trained in this business and they can be inducted for future space programs. In the past 5 years which I've been in IIT, the number of people who have started studying space dynamics. When I say space dynamics, like what General Butler said, it's propellants, it is control systems, it's electronics, it's all those things, has multiplied manifold. I see students coming to me and asking me a lot of questions on this. Like what he said, I see a huge uptake for this, and the government is quite aware of this whole story. So don't worry about it. Okay, sir, for AI users in military, do we have that capability in India?
Oh, yes. AI and ML will not be given to you by anyone. It will have to be Atam Nirbharta. It will have to be created in India. And it has, of course, multiple uses. Uh, Generative AI, which we talk of today, and one of the very I will only talk of what where it is used in space, from controlling the robots, from controlling the lander, to today, all satellites have to uh, decimate so much of data that we are doing edge computing in it. And what it means is now the satellite sees the difference from the last image it has seen and only passes it down rather than sending the whole data of the whole image. The multiple uses of AI and all these uses will reflect in the military. There are many more which I'm not talking of.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well,
Entire ballistic missiles, controlling our gun systems, our artillery, our other weapon systems. There's a whole lot of usage of it, and this is a developing capability, I would say, as far as India goes.
okay. Air Force, Navy, Army are known entities with known features, composition, structure, equipment, personnel, and skills. But what does a space force look like? Is it a military corps of engineers? Is it like a military corps of
Okay.
engineers?
Okay. Now, firstly, I'll try to answer the question because actually there's no perfect answer for this. The only two countries which have created something like a space force are USA and China. Now, in USA, what do they have? Firstly, they have military assets in space for communication, for ISR, which would be electrical, optical, or it would be SAR, or it would be for radio frequency. And they have certain satellites for PNT, which enhance what GPS is already doing. Now, all these assets are being controlled by what the Space Force is. Then there would be a number of ground stations. Like a very important domain of Space Force is space situational awareness or space domain awareness. These two words are used intermittently. Domain means a larger issue. But for doing that, and like America is doing it for the whole world, they keep an eye on every possible satellite which is there in space, including a large number of debris. And this data space catalog is in the open domain to inform everyone to know about it. And why this data is in the open domain, that people can ensure and maneuver the satellite to avoid a clash of two satellites in space. So, when a space force would come, it would definitely not look like any of the kinetic forces that is the Army, Navy, and Air Force. It would be totally different. Its assets would be definitely in space, on ground, and in the future, definitely on the moon and Mars also.
Yeah. And not only in Mars, it will be on asteroids also.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last question: how will the military space agency be part of the other theater commands? One sub space command for each theater. Well, it won't be, but I think you might as well answer this.
So you're very right that a theater commander has to have something of the space component, a space cell, or a subspace, like you said, command in each theater. It has to be an asset for each theater commander to be able to fight in all the domains of warfare. Because that is how we envisage our domains, our theaters, to independently fight from cyber to space to land to air to sea. So that will definitely happen. But from military space agency, we will have to first go up to make it into a military space force.
Yeah, it'll take time, right? It's
Yes.
going to take time. So all these things, see, look, what the larger issue which comes out today is India is under huge change. There's change happening every day. Your structures are changing, your capabilities are changing. So what today we see will not be there tomorrow, and what tomorrow we will experience will not be there day after. The rate of change is very fast in all these fields. And that is something which we have to understand. And the way we're going to fight wars is also going to change equally fast. Okay. Uh, yeah, yeah. This is something which you answered. He keeps coming back and is interested,
So, like I said,
audience.
firstly, Skyroot and Agnicool are, PSLV are the big launch vehicles. GSLV is the big launch vehicle. While Skyroot and Agnicool are launch vehicles which carry smaller weight and carry it to the low Earth orbit. And how can they help India's defense? When I was talking of launch on demand, who else can give it but the capability of these two companies?
You
They
know,
would have a company to quickly launch and launch at hotspots where we want them.
yeah.
That's, so that is a short answer.
Yeah. See, the critical part which takes time to be engineered, I won't say engineered, to be manufactured and machined are the engines, right? Now, Agnikul makes engines out of 3D printing. So they can make an engine within 3 days. In 3 days, they can make an engine. So that means every 3 days you can launch a vehicle if you put it in serial, right? I mean, of course, it's not that you make an engine in 3 days, the vehicle is ready to fire in 3 days. That will take about a week because other things have to be put in place. This is issue police has to be transported from where it is being manufactured to the launch place. But you can have a cycle, you can have a chain, coming out. That is the capability which I see coming out. And I keep interacting with these Agnikul chaps. And in Chennai, I keep after all, it's in our institute. Incidentally, Agnikul is a startup of the aerospace department in where I am there. So I know these fellows and what they're doing. So all this is something which is happening, and it is so great to see youngsters doing all this. So if there are any youngsters amongst you, I mean, you can take this thing. And it's not only for, we always think military, but the civilian use is huge. See, that is something which we have to understand, right? So I'll end the thing here today. I think General Butt has given us a tremendous insight into what's happening in space and how that space is getting plugged into defense, and what are the defense requirements and how that is being extracted from space. Yesterday we were doing not much. Today you're doing something, but tomorrow you will be doing hell of a lot, and that leap will be huge, right? And I'd like to thank General Butt for having put all this across. And I'd like to thank everyone who's seeing it. Look, in Gunner Shot, you'll get these classy programs. और वो यार वो ट्रूडो ट्रूडो क्या कर रहा है, वो हरदीप सिंह निज्जर को मार दिया नहीं मार दिया, तो हर बंदा बोलता है. There are very few people who will give you this kind of information. So if you like this, please like the video and also subscribe to Gunner Shot. Anything else you want to add, Anil? I'd be grateful.
Just a last line for uh, the viewers and especially the military viewers. One thing after the Ukraine war and what is happening in Israel, we should be very clear is space today gives you visibility to everything your adversary has. And this means your adversary will also have a bean count of everything you have, including human beings. So the new war has to be fought that be it cloud cover, be it anything, space will be able to see everywhere and everywhere. And the number two thing is today private space has become a big player in war. In Ukraine, strategic communication to the Ukraine armed forces as well as ISR has been provided by private companies. Their assets were two bedraggled satellites, but they have had a better capability. Their entire communication has been based on that and better ISR because of space. Private companies, and Elon Musk's company and other companies have supported them in this. So this is a new dimension. Private companies providing ISR, communication, PNT.
Thanks a lot, General Bhatt. So grateful to you. I will get you back on Gunner Shot when any new development takes place in space as
Sure, sir.
related to India or elsewhere. With this,
Sure.
I will sign off. Thank you, good evening, and Jai Hind to all of you.
Thank you and Jayan sir.